And what we've learned is a lot of it is through storytelling. Something that I grew up with in HR is you've got to win hearts and minds to what you're doing from a business strategy perspective. You go and do a roadshow and say, hey, our North Star is this. Here's why, and here's why I'm so passionate about it, and here's what we need to invest in to get there. It's the same thing. It's storytelling. So that's where the leadership comes in, because the leader needs to be able to tell that story internally to many different stakeholders.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Johnny Campbell, CEO and co-founder of Social Talent. And this week on the podcast, we're speaking with Barb Hyman, who's the CEO of Sapia.ai, about the importance of strong leadership in bringing AI tech into your TA organization. Barb, you're joining us from Melbourne, Australia. It's late at night for you at the moment. You're super welcome to the podcast. I hope you have a glass of wine in your hand. I wonder if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our audience, telling them a little bit about you, your business, and how you found yourself here.
I'm so excited to be here. I've only recently discovered you and your podcast, Johnny, and I genuinely love it. So I started Sapia back in 2018. I have a fairly alternative background, let's say. I came from being a lawyer, then I was a management consultant for many years at BCG, and then ended up as a CHRO, and really lived the pain of hiring, having worked in organizations where people were the most important thing in the organization, but even though they didn't sit on the balance sheet, a huge amount of costs went into hiring, retaining, developing, inspiring. And the whole process of how we did that was really broken for both sides, both the human and the organization. And so wanted to fix it. Back in 2018, no one really thought about AI. I certainly didn't have the brains to come up with the innovation. That's my co-founder, Booty, who's the PhD and the brilliant AI innovator. But I wanted to bring agency and humanity to hiring. And that's the journey we've been on for the last 6 or 7 years. We're an AI native company. We work with enterprise consumer brands around the world, organizations typically hiring at scale who care about experience and who care about diversity and who want to save time and money.
What does it do though, right? Because you have an AI tech company, you're in the HR space, you're in the hiring space, you're passionate about fixing hiring, right? You hear this from companies, you see it on billboards, right? But give me the detail of what does Sabia actually solve for? Like, what are the use cases that your customers have applied Sapia.ai to? And then what are the ones that you want to try and explore next?
So there's a pre-GPT and a post-GPT story. The pre-GPT one is we basically took a thesis, which is that language has great signal. And that's the whole science of NLP. And that chat would be the form through which people would engage in the workplace.
Right.
People sleep with their phone, they love their phone, they trust their phone, they overshare with their phone. If we could find a way to use those two elements to understand who people are as they apply for a job, maybe we can help them have a better experience on the way through and organizations better understand them. And we invented what is still, I think, the world's only genuine AI chat interview based on a data set that we've built. So we now have 3 billion words. That's really our moat from an investor perspective. Words meaning responses to structured interview questions. So it's built around a science, the science of structured interviewing. So if you want to put us in a box, call us an assessment. It's definitely not a chatbot. It understands who you are from language. So much like you are listening to me, and through my responses, you're learning things about me, my way I think, the way I articulate, reflective learning, etc. That's what we're doing, but we're doing it at scale through the medium of chat. And the first thing we disrupted was assessment, because most assessment is really terrible. It doesn't give the human agency. It doesn't help you learn. It's tedious. It's long. This is 5 questions that are very much like an interview that are untimed. And so from an inclusion perspective, it's fundamentally transformative for organizations who want to optimize for diversity right at the beginning. So if you think about, organizations who get a truckload of applicants, think in Australia, Woolworths, 1 million applicants a year, Tesco, Costa, Bunnings, Starbucks, these kinds of businesses, the quality of who they hire, that they are people that they can really represent their brand, that will do good service for their customers, is their business. It's always striking to me how companies spend so much money on marketing, getting people in store and having beautiful products in store, beautifully displayed, and then they think very little about the person who's going to be engaging with that customer at the last mile, the last meter. And so the problem we solve is that we identify through a scoring using algorithms that we've built, whether or not someone has a certain profile, critical thinking, resourcefulness, maturity. So we basically measure skills through language. And post GPT, it's fundamentally shifted. Now what we've realized is that our secret sauce is our ability to understand people and measure skills and provide that data intelligence for you to do a whole lot of other things. So today, how our customers are using it is, I like to do a bit of an imagine story. Imagine that you're hiring for engineers and you get 1,000 applicants. You're not reading a CV because the CV doesn't mean anything anymore. You're certainly not inferring data from a CV because that CV is fake to begin with. But you really care who that person is because you're a startup and you want someone who's like relentless and acts like a founder and is curious and agile and all that kind of good stuff. All of that is measurable. You measure it through a conversation. It's very transparent, very consensual. That person learns, right? They get feedback. We're scoring. But then now, as a recruiter, I can go and prompt that talent intelligence to say, I hired Johnny. He's incredible. Can you find me another Johnny?
Mm.
I'm interviewing Johnny. Can you write me an amazing interview guide for Johnny? I'm doing a referral check for Johnny. Can you tell me what I should ask? I'm onboarding Johnny. Write me a development plan. So there's a number of different tools now that we've built that really solve for the end-to-end process of what we call define brilliant. What are you really looking for? That is the starting point for any good decision. What is the problem you're trying to solve for? What profile of person do you need, right? How do you then measure brilliant, which is the IP that we've built? And then how do you discover brilliant, which is the agent that sits on top of that? So now we're working with really still companies that are hiring 500 plus, but in any role, where the change management has fundamentally changed. We used to sell to HR. You're selling to the CHR of Woolworths who wants a brilliant experience that's fair, that's efficient. Now we're selling to recruiters and hiring managers. And that in itself has changed our whole sort of operating model and the people we're bringing in. But so it's evolved a lot. Ultimately, it's about finding talent. Finding talent, both you finding your talent, because I think all decisions around people need to be two-sided. It is striking after doing almost 7 million interviews, everyone gets feedback, how little people know themselves. And so we build your self-awareness of your skills and we build the organization's awareness of your skills. And those two things are both necessary to arrive at a good decision about where you should sit.
So, Barb, when someone's looking at Sapia as a potential, vendor to work with, product, I hate the word vendor, right? Pisses me off. It makes people who bring amazing tech to
I'm never
say,
selling, honey. I'm never selling.
oh, I know, but listen, when people are trying to buy or procure technology or solve problems with technology, um, they'll typically look, certainly on scale, at someone like Sapia.ai and say, great, what part of our budget or what part of our tech stack is this replacing or improving, right? So look, you started with saying assessments might be a box people could put you in, but you've post GPT hinted at lots of other things you do. So talk to me about your thoughts about, when someone comes along to you and says, hey, Sapia.ai, AI, where would you fit into our tech stack? What product are you replacing? Talk to me about that thinking, that process. Is it something you come across that people try and first figure out which box to put you in, how much budget they have for that box, who their current vendor is and who the competitors are? Is that the right way to think about it? Is that how people think about companies like yourself and technology like yourselves?
Look, I gotta tell you that analysts love boxing you, and it really pisses me off, because it's not like that anymore, technology. And when you look at those images that people put on LinkedIn of this ridiculous, you know, Venn diagram of 1,000,001 different companies doing different, you can't go for single point solutions anymore as a buyer. No one can afford to do that and have the 80 tools in the drawer that they never use. And it's not like that. Technology is really blending in a world of particularly data-driven technology. So, look, we try not to, box ourselves because part of what we do selectively, and I don't mean this to sound sort of arrogant, but we do look for the right organization, the right problem, and the right persona. And someone who wants to think differently about what they're doing, but most importantly, think deeply about what value they want to offer. And so, we have to go at their pace of change. And that may mean that we start in a really small way and we're an assessment, right? BT is a great example. I mean, you've met Matt and he talked about, I just wanted a better assessment. And whilst I want to go in and sell a transformation, of the whole function, I found that it's very hard for people to get their head around that. So we go, okay, that's fine. And then he starts to see, actually, this can offer me a chance to rewrite the way we're doing this. That step can drop, that step can go away. And suddenly now you've got recruiters who are, in a visual way, if you think about what recruiters spend their time doing, you've got this sort of big bump in the road. On the front end, you've got sourcing. On the back end, you've got schmoozing. And in the middle, you've got all that chunk of work. And so that's where recruiters are spending their time today. So if that goes away, suddenly you're in a whole different world of rewriting the recruiter job. And that's the hardest thing that buyers find is, how am I going to bring my team along on this journey? What am I going to say to them? I've had one client say to me that someone in the team, a recruiter, actually took stress leave for 3 days after we presented, about the opportunity to rewrite the way that they did their job, because she just felt so stressed about it. And so you have to go at the pace of that organization, but we usually start small, and then we scale across the organization. And that scale may mean beyond talent acquisition into talent management, because
Mm.
really the two are blending. It's the same thing. How do we find talent? What tools do we have? What data do we have? What experiences can we offer to do that?
So I imagine starting off, considering you're working with companies that hire 500 plus, right? So into tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands potentially, you know, you are going to have to integrate with their core tech stack, maybe their HCM that they use, or Workday, whatever it might be, and SAP Success Factors, whatever it might be today. But I gather that, from that initial use case, as you say, it might be assessment, it might be something else. Um, the spider web grows, or the legs grow into different areas. Talk to me about how a customer sees that, and how do you make that work with the tech stack? But also on your end, talk to me about how you're using this world of AI to also generate new possibilities from a product perspective, and
Mm.
what that process looks like compared to a pre GPT world.
Mm. So, look, we really sit as a talent intelligence layer between the ATS and the HRIS. We're not displacing either of those. We don't try to be either of those. But when you think about both of them, there are systems of record that sort of move people along a bit like a general ledger and store stuff, but they don't really help you do better. They don't help you decide better as much as they claim that they do. Ultimately, we're there to help the individual drive to better decisions, fairer decisions, more intelligence, and to use all of that data to shortcut the question around talent. So, an outcome of using Sapia is one, obviously you're not spending on job boards. No one wants to spend money on job boards, because you can see the talent, you can discover the talent, right? And you've got very good data that tells you whether or not that person is the right person for the role. And then you can use an agent to go and check in on, Johnny, are you still interested and available? We'd love to bring you forward through to final interview. You're also replacing possibly the CRM, because in effect, what a CRM does is it enables you to consolidate data and manage data and leverage data to support talent decisions. And once you've created a data set around a person, right? Because that's really been the big limitation for recruitment for decades, which is they're flying blind. They have no idea whether you're gonna be the right person, Johnny. So they need to put you through the same frigging process as everyone else. There's no scale in that, right?
Mm.
Every single person goes through the same torturous process of 3 weeks and 5 interviews, and, because there's no feedback loop. And so what you get when you're using a true AI tool, the power of AI is in the intelligence, not in the automation. If people come to us and say, we really just want to automate what we're doing, I'm like, go somewhere else. Like, that's not the right persona for us. And that's fine if that's what's important. But if you're really looking to make more intelligent decisions, you need good intelligence. And that comes from capturing a data DNA about you upfront. That's very consensual. I think something that's really important, maybe not reflected in regulation, is that you are, as an individual, whether candidate or employee, saying, yep, I know the data that I'm giving you, I'm agreeing to give it to you, and you can use it. And then once you have that, you can use it for so many different things. It can help you understand how to onboard, how to develop, how to manage, how to give feedback. That's the power, right? Is really great data about the individual. So that's how we end up, replacing the CRM. Where it goes from there, I mean, I think you don't need onboarding. I think at some point we might go into reference checks, but that doesn't really turn me on. I just think that ultimately it's about, how does giving agency to recruiters and hiring managers change jobs to be done, but also changes how you do your job of hiring and managing.
And how would you,
Sounds
if
very
you're
abstract.
trying to,
Sounds very vague, doesn't it?
no, but and you know what? But
Talking
let me make it but
conceptually.
let me make it more concrete, right? So how would you analogize that for somebody who's saying, yeah, but like give me a frame of reference of a similar industry or a similar area where this has already happened. Like, do you have a frame of reference, an analogy you can use to help people get that concept or communicate that concept to other people?
Mm. Well, firstly, just to be clear about what is the ROI from using a tool like this. So obviously you're saving time and money, giving it back to the business. You're delivering employer brand advocacy because it's a beautiful experience. We talk about love, Canada love. That's the bar that I have. You're reducing turnover. Holland and Barrett reduced their turnover by 90%. So those are the kind of business metrics. The analogy I would give is that, you know, I- I'd hate to do this because I would never want to be compared as an HR person to a banking sector, but with all due respect to those who are in the FS business. But imagine today if you were going for a home loan, that the way you got that home loan was not spending 1-2 minutes online and then getting a preliminary approval, but actually the bank manager dragged you into the branch down the road, made an appointment, and said, "I want to meet you. I want to look you in the eyes, Johnny, and check that you're going to be a good bet. Can I trust you? You're going to pay your money back." And then drags all the tellers in and says, "I want them to meet you too because, coffee chat's important. They got to check the vibe, see if they agree with me because, I need to calibrate my decision and some, I shouldn't make it on my own." And then says, "Amazing to meet you. See you later. After 3 hours, we'll let you know in 3 weeks." I mean, the banks would be out of business. That is how recruitment works. And in fact, 3 weeks is not too bad. Often it's 60, 90 days, even for roles that are fairly sort of low level roles. So, HR and TA is just a world apart from the rest of their peers in terms of how marketing functions, how finance functions, and HR is a function of risk. Giving money to people is the highest risk business you can possibly imagine. So why aren't we further advanced in how we think about assessing risk than we are today, given the gulf between how one sector does it and how, TA does it?
And so, expanding on that kind of banking analogy, how does the financial services industry today do it? Like, talk to me about the data. You mentioned obviously permission from candidates sharing their data. What are the important data points that you see as being relevant into hiring that you're capturing in terms of, you mentioned obviously the 5 questions earlier on in the earlier screening, etc. What kind of data points are relevant to hiring decisions that could be done on scale? And what does that new world of hiring look like to you? Like, what do you think you extrapolate forward into the future? Maybe you've already done this with some customers. How do you get that more equivalent data-driven decision in that has a quality outcome? How do you get that from hiring compared to how the banking industry gets it in loan applications
Mm.
today?
Look, I've always thought when I was in HR that there is, think of it as a Venn diagram, like three circles overlapping, and you're looking for the intersection in the middle. And that is, can they do this job? Are they the right person for my team today, in next 12 months, depending on your business horizon? And then are they the right person for our culture? And it's the intersection of all three. And there's a lot of frigging context in that. You might be brilliant in a startup in an engineering role and completely fail in another context in an
Mm.
engineering role. And so that context needs to be fit in from the starting position. And what doesn't happen very often is that. If I think about in our environment, it's taken me years to figure out what kind of person really best suits this craziness, of the world that we're in when R&D is sort of inverted and suddenly now they're doing Horizon Zero, not Horizon 3 work. And so, being able to identify and capture context, what we do is we do that as part of a process. There's a tool we call Job Analyzer Studio, which helps convert the job description, firstly improve it through AI, but convert it into a set of skills and competencies, either using your framework or ours, so that you're going with a skills first approach. But it also ensures that you're feeding in any additional context. So let's say you've got an engineering code of culture, something, you can feed it in. In our case, it's our values. Anything else that is important, you're going to be working as part of a hard ass team with a tough manager. You can't be needy. You have to be self-reliant. All of that stuff that matters to whether or not that person's going to be the right fit. And then ultimately what we're doing is measuring that person's profile. We're measuring their skills. So any competencies across really any competency framework we can discover through language is what we do as humans. And we're doing it through technology, and we're doing it with a data set and an IP that we've built over time. So that's the core bit of what we do. But then the other bit is the reasoning. So, as everyone knows, if you're using AI, you have to do a number of fundamental things, whether there's regulation or not. Firstly, you have to test for bias. You have to provide high levels of explainability and high levels of transparency and all the other good things around data, data privacy, data sovereignty, etc. And the thing that we've always been obsessed about, and it really comes from my experience in HR, is that trust in something, in anything, comes with transparency. And, I saw that in HR. If I rolled out a new policy and I didn't tell people why, I would just get
Mm.
slack attacks. right? Just would
Mm.
really not go down very well. And so what you need to do is show people, I think Johnny is, scored 80 for this, and here's his measure on every skill, and here's why. You can check it for yourself, right? Like AI is held up to a much higher bar than the human. I love Johnny. He's great. I'm hiring him. He's fantastic. I feel it in my gut. No one's going to challenge that. But as soon as you bring AI in, the level of defensibility is on an order of magnitude higher, as it should be. And so reasoning is the brilliance of LLMs. So we've combined our data set with Claude. That's the LLM that we feel is most aligned to our own AI principles with our own prompting frameworks. Prompting is an IP skill set. And so we're able to guide you in a very human in the loop, transparent way from this is what I'm looking for. Let's iterate and refine that. Here's the skills that it means you need. Here's the interview guide. You're creating your own AI chat interview. So effectively, everyone's like an IO site creating their own assessment. Deploy it, someone gets measured, and then you have this scoring, insight, reasoning, and the ability to mine all of that for relevant tasks. So it's quite a full suite of products. And honestly, when people see it, you just haven't seen anything like that before, because we're so used to matching
Mm.
and CV inference, and this is giving you when you've got deep data about someone's skills, you can use that for a lot of other processes and jobs as well. If I don't know if I answered your question.
No, for me you did, but no, you touched on a bunch of topics there, Barbara. I'd like to come back to, right. You talked on obviously some of the regulations, the privacy, the transparency, the explainability, the fact that AI is held to a much higher standard than the human. So these are all facts and challenges. And if we have a leader listening to this going, Barb, I'm sold. I'm with you on the vision of the future. I agree that we can't just be replacing like for like tech. We need to think differently. This is a new way of approaching it. We can get better outcomes, etc. And they're up for implementing a tech like Sapia.ai. You and I have both met people like this. And you introduced me to Matt and BT, who's got through that as British Telecom, for those of you not familiar with BT, in the UK or elsewhere. But a lot of leaders struggle with their organization, as in the organization represented by legal, compliance, by infosec, and all these different stakeholders, who often, you know, are seeing this as the first big enterprise-wide initiative at a level of risk, that they haven't seen before, and it's the head of TA or head of talent coming to them saying, "Hey, this we got to roll this out." They just haven't done this yet. And so therefore you're the guinea pig for the organization, and you're having to try and navigate an organization who are resistant, who don't really know how to evaluate this, are fearful. They may support you generally, but they're going to probably make it very difficult for you to get this over the line. You've got this over the line with many different organizations, many times being their first time doing this. What have you learned about leaders who are trying to implement an AI technology like this in hiring, and it's probably the first time the organization's done it? What advice can you give? What are those learnings? Is there a framework you use or recommend?
Yeah. So firstly, I have found it a lot easier to do it in the UK than in the US. GDPR has built a muscle around compliance that frankly the US doesn't have. They
Mm.
don't have privacy laws. AI regulation is sort of state-based and still very much embryonic. And so having regulation provides boundaries, and all you need to do is then run a process to comply with that regulation. And so that just feels very natural for people in that market, whereas in the US, I found it much more challenging. So we're very much focused on UK, Europe as a market because of their really regulation maturity. So we have a different view to, Jan LeCun from Meta, who thinks that Europe's over-regulating. I actually think that regulation provides boundaries and clarity and helps people make decisions from an enterprise perspective. The second thing is you absolutely need a leader. We at Woolworths, we had someone who'd been in the business for 40 years, like just had such kudos and gravitas.
Mm.
We wouldn't have got that. They were the first ones, who really went early. And we chose retail because retail uses AI in their core business. And so it doesn't take much to go to the CEO, hey, you make decisions every day about shelf positioning and pricing based on data. You've also got people scale. You've got 200,000 people. Surely there must be some value from using AI around what you do with people. And so that jump does not feel so large when you're working with businesses that are, born and bred on AI. as opposed to, say, public sector, who we don't choose to work with because we find they're not born and bred like that. So fundamentally, leadership, the right sector, but actually just the problem, Johnny. You need a big problem to solve. And it was interesting pre-GPT. It felt like we were just, door-to-door combat as it is as a startup, and you're knocking down doors and trying to get anyone to talk to you. And certainly in the US, even with Apple, I will say, we got to Cupertino with Apple. This is years ago now, and the legal counsel said, no, we're not doing it. This is way before GPT. We don't want any machine learning being used to help, do anything on the people's face. Is too risky. And now, of course, the world has changed, and people are saying we want to talk to you because we'd really love to use AI. So you've got this downward pressure from the board to want to have conversations. But you still need a really big problem, and because you're driving change. Like, the technology is 10%. Our technology is ready built. You can go live tomorrow. The hard bit is the people side, and winning hearts and minds, and changing roles, and mapping out the implementation timeline. And we're working with Costa Coffee, for instance. They've got thousands of stores and all these store managers who no one's ever going to meet. We're never going to meet them. How do we get them to trust something that is sort of somewhat invisible? Obviously, as I said, there's profiling and so on that you can see, or insights. That's something that we're still learning, and I would say we're learning with our clients. And what we've learned is a lot of it is through storytelling. Something that I grew up with in HR is you've got to win hearts and minds to what you're doing from a business strategy perspective. You go and do a roadshow and say, hey, our North Star is this. Here's why, and here's why I'm so passionate about it, and here's what we need to invest in to get there. It's the same thing. It's storytelling. So that's where the leadership comes in, because the leader needs to be able to tell that story internally to many different stakeholders.
We've been having this conversation internally with our team around a new product we're launching in a couple of months that's AI driven. And there's
Awesome.
lots of interest,
Mm.
lots of people are interested in the product, wanting to see it, wanting to demo it. And I've pushed back because, like you, I'm saying, I don't see the problem that they have that's big enough for this to be, for this to win. And it's all very well for a leader to say, I love that tech, it's shiny, it's new, it'd be cool to have it. As I don't think that's good enough. I think you do need this massive problem to solve. Can you maybe share a little bit more around what are the types of problems the leaders you're working with are solving that get the, not just the budget, because budget's only one part of it, but get the commitment of an organization to actually do the hard work to roll this out, to convince the hearts and minds? Like, what in hiring, what have been some of those use cases? Maybe we'll start with the initial use case that BT came to you with, that Matt is going to be talking on our upcoming webinar about.
Mm. Yeah, look, it comes down to people and the quality of people, and that could be measured in terms of we're not holding on to people, we're hiring, and we've got a constant revolving door, and that has a very quantifiable cost, and it's usually a cash cost, actually, as opposed to time savings, which is also really valuable but harder to build a business case around. So when and the data tells you that you're just on a hamster wheel, that's a very strong start to a business case. The second one is when um, the business is on its own transformation and they can see the organization spending way too much time hiring. When I was in my CHRO role, I was at a tech company, and my boss, the CEO, came to me and said, actually, another funny story related to that, but my boss came to me and said, Barb, we're not going to hit our revenue targets because we're not going to build our product roadmap because our engineers are spending so much time hiring. Fix it. And at that point, the engineers were hiring 2% of people who apply, and they were very proud of this ridiculous standard that they
Mm.
had, and like, wow, you have to be so brilliant to get a job here, and we're going to put you through these ridiculous number of interviews. And that interview time is the biggest opportunity cost to a business that might be hard to bank, but you can actually quantify it. You can quantify it in terms of speed of delivery, particularly in a technology company, and you can do that elsewhere, in other contexts. And so, once we started to actually talk to organizations and say, because you can track it through Outlook and Calendar. How many hours are your hiring managers, your people leaders? Because hiring managers, not their job. Their job is doing something else. How many hours are they spending doing it? What if you could halve that? What impact would that have on the business? That's game changing, not filling the role faster, doing less scheduling. It's fundamentally about hiring less, right? Hiring less people and using less people to hire less people. Those are the two biggest problem statements I see. And obviously, the bigger the organization, the bigger those numbers are, as they are with BT. And that's where if someone gets that on the other end, then I know that we're working with the right persona because they care deeply about business impact more than they do TA impact.
I love that. Simplifying it all down to either you are hiring less people, which has a real direct cost, or you're hiring the same amount of people with less people to do it. I think that's a really nice way of categorizing it. You can filter out from those, but they're real two strong, what you might call hard business cases where you can actually show real P&L savings as opposed to, I agree with you, savings in time is like, great, people have time back, but what are they going to do? Are they going to play video games? Are they going to, actually give that back to the business productivity wise? It's really hard to measure from a CFO perspective. But you did talk about at the start of the podcast, and I think you've hinted at it again here, the role of a strong leader, because Matt, for example, in BT shared with us that even to get the pilot up and running, he took a brave step to say, I'm going to reduce my budget for ad spend and redirect it to get a pilot. So he went to the business not looking for net new money, even to do a pilot, knowing that it was unlikely to get net new money. That takes a smart, brave leader to take a chance to go, I'm going to potentially risk not filling the current jobs I have by reducing my ad spend in the belief that in the future I'll have less roles to hire for, so it'll all work out. So walk me through what that good leader. I'm going to use air quotes here, Barb. What is that strong leader? Because maybe different people have a different view of what a strong leader looks like. To you, what does it look like in the context of deploying, implementing AI technology?
Mm. Great question. So one that they level up 1, 2, 3 levels, and they start to think from a business perspective, even at the CEO perspective, what's that story? Both from a success as well as a risk perspective. So they
Mm,
understand the balance between, what happens if we get on the front page? What does my CEO say? And what's the story I want to tell, or my team wants to tell in 12, 24 months, right? So they're able to think bigger picture, a helicopter view rather than in the micro. So that's, and I see that as sort of ambition, right? And having a strategic brain. I think the other is, as I said, storytelling, the ability to win hearts and minds, but fundamentally you've got to get your head around the numbers. And, there is a spectrum of conversations I have where I'll ask people 3 or 4 questions around, what are the metrics that matter to you? What do they look like? 80% of people can't answer. Even though they have Workday, SuccessFactors, Oracle, somehow they just seem to struggle to capture some fundamental metrics. And I think, HR's drowning in data, but they still struggle to sort of cut through and go, what really matters here? Something I think about a lot is there one North Star metric for TA that they should just anchor to? And I think it's retention, because retention tells me you're hiring well in the first place. You've got a decent culture because people are sticking around. Your leaders are pretty good because the leaders drive culture. And you're finding ways for them to grow because people are ambitious to grow. And therefore, that means they're sticking around. I don't know. I struggle with that. But I think
you're
going back to they're able to tell a data story and they manage and measure through data all along the way. So, you've got to earn the right for funding. Like what I love about Matt is that he's funded the journey himself. And I try and work with leaders to say, how can you fund this yourself? We used to talk about that in the consulting world. Can you fund the journey through this strategy rather than having to ask for more funding? Like that's leadership rather than can I have another 100,000 for my next tool, please? And then he's obsessed with data, like 3 or 4 key metrics that he knows drive to outcomes. Like if you work backwards, always you work backwards from the business outcome retention. What are the, 2 or 3 stages before that that tell me whether or not I'm gonna, have a the lead indicators that's gonna give me the great lag indicator, yeah? And he does that kind of funnel analysis, measures that, tracks that, and so he's always sharing a story around data. Like any leader, you have to paint the North Star of the vision, the strategy of how you're gonna get there, and how we're gonna measure ourselves along the way, and so all of those elements are really important to success in, whether it's introducing Sapia or any change.
If I can summarize, I'm trying to bring some of this together, Barb. What I'm hearing you say here today is that, first of all, you got to start with a big, meaty, juicy business case, a problem to solve, an opportunity that's unrealized, right? And again, you gave us a framework to think about: is it how do we hire less people, which saves the business money, or how do we hire the same amount of people with less people, or any combination of those, right? So, at a very high level, there's two categories there. When you got a clear business case that's going to motivate people to move budgets around, to get work done, etc., that's important. A strong leader, number two, is required to, first of all, identify that, I'd imagine, in the first place, but also communicate that across the business and get that buy-in. And then third, it's not just thinking about, swapping one piece of tech for the other. It's being more holistic about, this is a world we're living in 2025 as we're broadcasting, where there's a real change in the tech stack. You might not need a CRM, you might not need the assessment tool. They might be the same product, and the products that you use will evolve. And we're under pressure to reduce the amount of vendors we're working with, use existing vendors when possible, try and have a better integration. Um, and then the measurement piece being really important, which ties back to the start. You need to be able to measure all this stuff is working. So you talked a lot about pilots. So I'm imagining you're recommending piloting as a way of going forward, funding it yourself as much as possible. So you're not asking the business for more money for that new shiny tool. So you're showing that leadership, showing that responsibility. So identifying the right problem to go after, showing leadership to communicate that, using data and metrics to tell the story, having a pilot process that clearly shows the outcomes to the business as well. But still within all of that, how do we get over the overall risk? You mentioned it, you can go after sweet spot customers, like you mentioned, Woolies were using AI already, so that was very handy. And maybe that's what a leader in TA can do. They can analogize by saying, hey, over here we use AI to make decisions, so why not over here? But if your business isn't there, are you a lost cause, Barb, or is there still hope if this is genuinely the first time you're going to be properly using AI in the business?
Mm. Look, you definitely need some top-down leadership support. And when I say leadership, I mean board, C-suite, in terms of, openness to AI. That's pretty critical. And, we have in every instance been the first time the company has applied their AI governance framework across the board.
Boo.
And sometimes they're building it, on the run. So everyone's learning. And I think for me, we just have to pick the right player because ultimately we don't just want to sell, we want to see success. So that's where leadership also matters to implementation. Like churn kills you as a business, as a startup. And these are long-term partnerships. A lot of our clients have been with us for 5, 6 years. So I have a lot of enterprise empathy, you know. Someone once said to me, she used to be the CEO of Salesforce in Australia, and she said to me, you know, encourage your sales team not to celebrate when the deal's done, but when the client's celebrating. Like once they sign that deal, like they're freaking out, the client. They're like, oh my God, I've now got the business to invest all this money. How am I going to make this successful? I could lose my job, right? This is not like IBM. This is, I could really lose my job over this. And you have to kind of have a huge amount of empathy for that and recognize that you're just starting and it's way too early to celebrate. Celebration comes when they, on a QBR wherever and say, look, we want to tell you the story of what we've achieved here. And I know that sounds really kind of naff, but it is actually the reality of AI is it's much higher risk for someone to bring it in, which is why you need courage, conviction, big problem. And you go with their pace, right? And you celebrate when they celebrate.
Barb, I love it. If anyone listening wants to find out more about Sapia.ai, or if, do you have resources that could help them just navigate decisions around
Yeah.
AI that you can recommend?
Yeah.
How should they contact you? What resources can they reach out
Look, I
get
I'm
from
on
you?
LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, and I think the other is, education is agency, that you got to educate yourself, right? There's a world of difference between, like, if you think you're gonna buy a Porsche, you're gonna buy a Barina, you're gonna buy something in the middle, like, you have to learn what are the difference between different stacks. But most importantly, you have to learn what questions to ask to really do the due diligence around safety and ethics and responsibility. So there's a couple of, bipartisan, if you like, or nonpartisan, frameworks that we've developed that we've put out. One's called the FAIR framework. We've presented it to Keith Sonderling. So many different organizations have downloaded it, a lot of academics. We did in 2019, and, these can be just a starting point for a conversation.
Mm.
So I think what I'd say is start talking about this, not AI, but problem, and then go on the journey around AI together as a team. It's a very powerful way to build a strong TA team as well, is to go on that journey together.
Barb, I can't thank you enough for joining us, taking time out of your enormously busy schedule. I know it fuels you. There's so much change and the energy is evident from what you do. I love the tech. I love the stories because it's very practical in terms of the work you're doing with customers. I love the passion you bring to that as well. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Not at all. And thank you for listening, for tuning in this week to hear Barb's story, to understand hopefully more insights on how you can go on your AI journey. And don't forget, it's not an AI journey. It's a solve big, meaty problems for your organization journey that could be benefited by AI. But it is a new dilemma. It's a new world. It's a new challenge. And organizations like Sapia.ai are there to help you, and Barb in particular to help you navigate that. We'll be back next week with another great conversation with a great leader talking about hiring excellence. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you enjoy this, check out our back catalog of several hundred shows with leaders like Barb over the last few years. We'll be back next week. Until then, take care.